Chapter 26 of the Alps, the Danube, and the Near East. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Read by Betty B. Digging Up Old Greece. I am on the spot that the ancients called the navel of the earth. Almost under my feet was the den of Pytho, the serpent oracle, slain by the god Apollo, and I can throw a piece of marble from a broken statue or column into a hole in the rocks that may have been the mouth of the oracle of Delphi. It was the oracle that made the city of Delphi, which is now represented by the ruins about me. It was consulted by the leaders of the republics of Greece on all matters of moment, such as the making of laws, the beginning of wars, and the rise and fall of nations and men. Alexander the Great believed in it, Philip of Macedon bowed down before it, and Solon the lawgiver, Pindar the poet, and Plato the wise man all spoke of it with respect. I drove the 150 miles between Athens and Delphi in an American motor car. In ancient times, everyone walked or rode on horses or in chariots. They went up from the Gulf of Corinth on foot, for chariots could not climb the steep mountain. Delphi is situated on the slope of Mount Parnassus, as high up as the top of the Blue Ridge, and the mountain rises above it for another mile or more. A good automobile road now winds up to Castri, a town near the site of the Oracle City. I am writing this in the midst of the ruins. The Gulf of Corinth is more than 2,000 feet below me, and the land drops in terraces until it is lost in the water. To my left in the valley I can see a gray-green olive grove, its thousands of trees skirting the sea, and all about me are the remains of ancient temples and theaters and the paved streets of the old city, laid bare by the archaeologists. The ruins, which cover hundreds of acres, are backed by gigantic pink and gray cliffs, rising straight upward for thousands of feet. I am sitting in the Temple of Apollo, to which I climbed by the Sacra Via, a flagstone roadway lined with broken columns, bits of statues, and the beautiful carvings of the civilization of 2,500 years ago. Except for a column or so and the great stone blocks that made the foundation, the Temple of Apollo is all gone. Its floor covered almost 1/3 of an acre, and by my paces it was about 200 feet long and 75 feet in width. I have counted the columns from the holes in which they were set and find it took 15 to support the great roof. My guide tells me that the oracle was supposed to be under the floor of the temple, but so far no one has been able to discover the hole in the rocks over which the Pythoness sat upon her tripod and delivered the words supposed to have come to her from Apollo himself. Before she seated herself, there she chewed the sacred bay leaves and drank of the waters of the prophetic stream of Cassotus. Then, according to some, she was intoxicated by the ill-smelling vapors that arose through the cleft, and in this state muttered the oracular answers to questions which the priests about her put into intelligible sentences. The devout even claim that these vapors were the mystic breath of the god, but the probability is that there were no exhalations whatever through the fissure, though there may have been a slight draught of air. This, however, would have been enough to complete the already overwrought condition of the priestess. As I looked at the spot where the Pythoness may have sat, an American girl engaged in relief work on the island of Crete was standing beside me and said, "I would like to have seen the old dame who put it over on them." There was a temple on the site long before Rome was founded. It was burned to the ground, and a new one was erected in 548 B.C. when Cyrus was king of the Persians. Another temple was constructed 200 years later at the time of Demosthenes, and additions were made by Nero and Domitian along about the beginning of the Christian era. In the vestibule of the temple were engraved the sayings of the 7 sages, such as "Know thyself," "Moderation in all things," and "Nothing in excess," and inside the building itself was a great stone the shape of half an egg, which marked the center of the world. On this stone the 2 eagles that Zeus had caused to fly from the opposite ends of the earth met and roosted together. About this temple were vaults filled with gold and other wealth presented as offerings to the oracle by the great cities of Greece. The treasury of the Athenians has been re-erected out of the fragments of the building, but the golden shields taken from the Persians in the year 340 BC are still unrecovered. These accumulations of riches were looted by the conquerors who overran Greece. Sulla, who later besieged Athens, used the Delphic treasures for the payment of his troops, and Nero divided the plain below here among his soldiers and took 500 statues from the temple to Rome. At the time of Pliny, there were still 3,000 statues at Delphi, and the country about was one vast museum. Higher up on Mount Parnassus are the remains of the great theater, and higher still those of the stadium where ancient games were held, just as modern athletics are celebrated in the big marble stadium of the Athens of today. The stadium of Delphi was longer than that of Athens, but not so wide. The stadium at Athens will seat 50,000 spectators. The theater was an open-air hall paved with limestone slabs. It had seats of stone. It was in existence 2,000 years ago, for at that time one of the distinguished citizens of Greece gave money for its restoration. The acoustics seemed to have been perfect, for, sitting below in the temple, I could hear the sweet nothings that my secretary was whispering in the ear of the American maiden from Crete as they stood far above me. Most of the excavations of Delphi have been made by the French. A much greater work directed by the American School of Classical Studies has gone on at Corinth, where St. Paul went after his eloquent sermon on Mars Hill in Athens. Paul lived in Corinth a year and a half with Aquila, the tent maker, and he came back 6 years later and there abode 3 months in the house of Gaius. During his first stay he established a church and wrote the epistle to the Thessalonians, and while he was with Gaius he wrote his epistles to the Romans and Galatians. The American school, however, has made no discoveries as to St. Paul. Its work has been in excavating the ancient city and reconstructing parts out of the ruins. Corinth was at the height of its glory hundreds of years before Christ, and in the days of our Savior it was noted for its commerce and manufacture. It was then as large as Baltimore is now, and was a rival of Rome in its trade. It was one of the chief ports of the Mediterranean Sea. The historians say that it was 12 miles in circumference. Later, Corinth rebelled against Rome, and the Romans destroyed it. They sold its citizens into slavery, and for 100 years it lay desolate. Julius Caesar reestablished the town, and by the time St. Paul came, which was about 50 years after Christ, it was again celebrated throughout the Near East for its luxury and vice. St. Paul takes account of these things in his epistles. I went out by train to Corinth a few days ago. The modern town is not far from the western mouth of the Corinth Canal, and it may be reached by boat through the canal, by railway, or by automobile. It is an ordinary little Greek city of 5,000 people. The ruins lie about 5 miles away. There are Americans in charge, and it was with one of them that I wandered over the remains of the great past that are now coming to view. Among the excavations have been those of the waterworks and the fountain, fed by the spring of Piraean, where Pegasus, the winged horse, came to drink and was at last captured by Bellerophon. Pegasus, as the story goes, struck the earth with his hoof, and the water gushed forth, even as it did in Meribah, when Moses smote the rock for the thirsting Israelites. The fountain dates back to from 3 to 6 centuries before Christ, and the water again flows out of the marble lion heads into a square pit of stone, as it did in the past. The American school has excavated the old aqueduct. The reservoirs fed by the spring had a capacity of 120,000 gallons. Among the other excavations are those of the streets and shops of the city, and the remains of a theater, and the 2,500-year-old Temple of Apollo, with its lofty columns 8 feet in diameter. To me, one of the most interesting discoveries is that of the Oracle of Corinth, which gave forth decrees like the one I have described here at Delphi. The Oracle at Corinth was connected by a subterranean passage fitted with a mouthpiece that served as a speaking tube. The arrangement was such that the priest could crawl in underground some distance away and by a little ventriloquism make his prophetic words seem to come out of the mouth of the oracle. If the ancients had discovered the radio, they might have broadcasted the words of the gods to all parts of Greece. I am proud of what the American archaeologists are doing in digging up ancient Greece and opening its wonders to the eyes of the world. About a half-century ago, the American Institute of Archaeology established a school of classical studies at Athens. The object was to give graduates of American universities and colleges an opportunity to study the classics and Greek art and antiquities on the ground, and to aid in original research in these subjects. The best of Greek professors were chosen, and 9 of our colleges and universities undertook to pay the expenses until a permanent endowment could be secured. The school was established in 1882, and the first president of the board was James Russell Lowell. The committee that now runs the institution consists of representatives from 33 colleges scattered over the United States. During my stay at Athens, I went out to see the school buildings. They stand on the southern slope of Lycabettus and look out at the Acropolis and Mount Hymettus. The ground for them was given by King George I of Greece, and additional space has been acquired partly by gift from the Greek government and partly by purchase. It is intended to erect a dormitory for American girls who come to this country to study the classics. This school has the largest and best library of ancient Greece known to the world. This was started by the school itself, some of the money having been given by John Hay, the Carnegie Corporation, and John D. Rockefeller. In addition to this, the school has just received the magnificent library of 50,000 pieces collected by Dr. Johannes Gennadius, who for 40 years was Greek minister at the court of St. James. Dr. Gennadius was an eminent scholar and devoted his life to the collection of these books. Dr. Herbert Putnam, the director of our Library of Congress and one of the best authorities on ancient and modern bibliography, has appraised the library and says that it has no equal anywhere. Every American student who comes here is expected to make some definite study or research and write a paper thereon. The school has many lecturers, and the classes go to all parts of Greece, the Greek government giving them half fare on the railroads. They have made important excavations not only in Greece, but about the site of Old Troy and elsewhere in Asia Minor. Their work at Corinth has been carried on for more than 30 years. During this time, they have laid bare the area of a large city and have made remarkable finds, including temples and statues, which cast a new light upon ancient Greek civilization. Athens has a national museum where one can build up in his mind the Greece of the past. The excavations are going on everywhere, and many new objects are being discovered. The Greek government is alive to the responsibility of safeguarding its antiquities, and for years has been running a lottery, the income from which is used for digging up and caring for ancient Greece. This lottery has 255 prizes ranging in value from $10 to $5,000 each. The wonderful discoveries in the tomb of Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings along the Nile have their counterpart in the gold and jewels unearthed by Dr. Schliemann and other explorers in Greece. The National Museum has masks of beaten gold in which have been pressed features so lifelike that they seem about to speak. I have the photograph of one representing the face of an old man, which would serve as a portrait of the original, except that it has lost the tip of its nose. There are golden cups decorated with portraits and vases of dull gold beautifully carved. Some of the cups would hold a half-gallon, and the golden masks are as large as the tin wash basins outside the back door of an American farmer. I am especially interested in the collections of jewelry, which show so well the follies and vanities of fashionable life 500 years before Christ. Among other exhibits is the skull of a woman with a gold pin which once bound her tresses stuck to it. Time and decay have glued the pin to the base of her neck. Nearby are scores of gold rings for the fingers, a peck or so of gold anklets, and huge gold rings for the biceps, somewhat similar to the ivory bracelets worn above the elbows by our women of today. Some of the arm rings which came from Mycenae are 3 or 4 inches wide. They are of pure gold. End of chapter 26.